Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade.
We chronicled the distinct memories of our childhood in our book, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s, which takes you on a notably historic journey through that often forgotten decade. We also want to hear about your experiences during the 1950s. We will feature guests whose special stories of that decade will bring to mind magical moments of reflection, some with tears, some with smiles, but above all, a good dose of laughter.
We would like you to chat with us as we bring to mind the sights and sounds so familiar to that time in history. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Welcome. We are so glad that you are joining us today. This is a special episode of the 1950s Fun Chat for us, and I'll tell you why. Back 56 years ago, in March of 1966, was the blizzard, the North Dakota blizzard of March 2nd through the 5th of 1966, that left an impact on every North Dakotan and even beyond our area, even into other states in the Midwest, that was affected by the outcome of all this snow, all this wind, and all the loss that occurred, whether it be in the loss of lives or the loss of livestock, which affected the economy of our state and certainly affected our farm, our Pfeiffer farm near Menoken during that blizzard. So today's episode probably won't have that fun factor to it, but it certainly will have we hope, an impact on your lives. And we have the wonderful memories of so many of our former neighbors that we are going to share with you today. And it makes it even more realistic so that you can place yourself in that time period and in that monstrous storm that was going on around us in March. Jackie, how can you take us forward today?
I will do that. First of all, I would like to call attention to the banner that is running across the bottom, whilethewindmillwatched.com. And this is the website for our book. And you'll see that book in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. It features a beautiful North Dakota sunset, and that sunset wraps around the book. And within this book, you'll find so many memories Janine and I have living in the Northern Great Plains in the 1950s. Now, you'll notice that we have shifted away from the 50s to the 60s this once, because we feel this is a very important occurrence that happened to us and everyone who was living in the state at the time, as Janine mentioned. We also want you to make sure you subscribe and also push that little button that will let you know that let us know that you're there with us.
And I might also add, too, that as we go along and share memories from that blizzard of 1966, if you have special memories or comments that you would like to include in this fun chat, please put them in the comment section below, or even put them on our Facebook page at While the Windmill Watched, and we were more than happy to respond to you and learn of your memories of that time, March 2nd through the 5th, 1966. So Jackie, let's start us out here. What were you doing on March 2nd, 1966?
Well, first of all, I'm going to let our readers know that I am going to be reading from page 159 in our book, whilethewindmillwatched.com. And this is going to set the scene. One of the most historic weather incidences in the Northern Great Plains occurred in March 1966. I was a student at North Dakota State University and had finished my finals early. I had hitched a ride west with other students arriving at home as the horrendous blizzard of '66 was assaulting the prairie. In retrospect, the car in which I had been riding must have been one of the last ones traveling on the interstate before the effects of the blizzard closed the highway. The blizzard raged for 3 worrisome days, invading a large part of the state. During those hours, it dropped 20 to 30 inches of snow, with the highest snowfall recorded at 38 inches. Wind gusts reached more than 70 miles per hour, creating tremendous snowdrifts that covered the tops of some mature trees in our shelter belt. Janine, take it from there.
All right. And then as we move on to Jackie getting home from NDSU, and I, of course, was a sophomore in high school at Bismarck High School at that time. And I remember coming home, getting home on the bus. We took a bus from Bismarck High School and from the school back out to Menoken. And then, of course, it went on from there to McKinsey and Sterling, dropping off all the students, the high school students in our 3 rural schools. So the storm had started. It was not a very pretty sight and pretty feel because we still had to go outside and do chores. We had to take care of the cattle and sheep. And then we had a bunch of chickens, laying hens that were in our chicken house. And of course, they had to be fed and watered. And we didn't have automatic waterers at that time. Water had to be taken to them in cream cans. And of course, because we had snow on the ground, we were actually putting those cream cans on a sled and taking them over the start of the snowdrifts that began to occur on Wednesday night. But I do think it is interesting when you talk about that's our situation and how it started. But we also have memories from our neighbor to the north, from the Nugabar family. They were just about a half a mile north of us and on the other side of Apple Creek. And sometimes it's really interesting, the difference in weather that can occur on opposite sides of bodies of water. And so I want to talk about two of the Nugabar family as we move forward. I also want to talk about our neighbors to the east who had a loss of cattle. But first off, Jackie's going to talk about our neighbors to the south, the Perkins family, and who are very special to us. They were about 1.5 miles south of us. And so their experiences coming from Marge, the mom, the mother of our friends, had some very interesting experiences to talk about. So Jackie?
Farm neighbor Marge Perkins recalls this. Bud went alone to milk the first evening. After that, Julie, that's their older daughter, went along until the last evening when the storm was really bad. I think they did not go out to milk that night. We sold milk in cans, so filled those until they were full and then had to dump the rest of the milk. The last night of the storm, Julie had taken cookies in her pocket so that she and Bud could have milk and cookies if they couldn't get back to the house. When it cleared and I saw the drifts and had no idea how they made it around those drifts between the house and the barn. Now, the Menoken community members often help their neighbors. I don't recall who had the biggest machinery, but several front-end loaders helped clear the snow where the banks were too big for shovels. Some friends and relatives from Bismarck came to help shovel after US Highway 10 was opened. That year, the winter show was postponed the first time ever, but we were able to go to Valley City for the 4-H livestock judging the next week, and Janine's going to tell you what the winter show is. Marge also recalls that some phone lines were down. Ours was one of them. Mom was worried about her family in southeastern North Dakota, so she dressed in layers of clothing and valiantly walked over 1 mile to Marge's house to see if she could use Marge's phone. Gratefully, the neighbor's phone was open.
The North Dakota Winter Show is the premier show, you might say, of a livestock show in North Dakota in the wintertime. It was never canceled. The weather was such that exhibitors could always get there, except in 1966. And that show was postponed then for the next week. Fortunately, the roads have been cleared enough, and people were still dedicated enough to exhibit, and vendors came, and the show went on. But it was a very memorable time for me, as I recalled being at the winter show and watching the loads of cattle come in, the exhibitors bringing in their cattle. And of course, that was what I was most interested in. But it was if our family, that livestock showing family, was coming in one at a time, and we embraced each other because we knew the disaster that had happened the week before, and yet we still had that draw to get together and to talk about those memories, and then talk about what happened at that time. So, and at that time also, I was on our Burleigh County 4-H livestock judging team, as was Julie Perkins and Dennis Trauger, our neighbors. And so our team from the Menoken Progressive 4-H Club was going to participate, and actually did participate in the livestock judging contest there. So we did make it, and it was fun, but boy, the obstacles of the weather that we had to overcome to get there. But when you talk about memories of that time from our neighbors, and I do want to mention too that the quote that Jackie just read from our neighbor Marge Perkins, realized that Marge is now in her 90s, and she recalled this very vividly to me as I spoke with her on the phone. It's everyone seems to have those memories imprinted in their minds as far as what actually happened in that early time period of March 1966. So as we go north to our neighbors to the north, the Nugabar family, uh, our our dear friends there, the mom Hilda was an excellent record keeper. She had a daily diary, and she wrote in it not just during the storm days, but she wrote in it religiously every day. And so to read some of her notes from that storm was very, very interesting. And I do want to just read a little bit about her, from the words from Hilda's diary, as contributed by her daughter. It is rare that schools close in North Dakota, as we have sufficient snow removal equipment and have adapted to the occasional winter storm. The blizzard of 1966 was an exception. Basically, everyone shut down and roads were blocked. And this is Marlis talking now. I was living in town, or in Bismarck, at the time, and remember barely being able to see the houses across the street. The blizzard ran from March 2nd through 5th, 1966, with cleanup days over the weekend. Bismarck received about 20 inches of snow, and I believe it was recorded at 27.5 inches of snow, and winds at about 70 miles per hour in strength that made this storm historical. My mother took pictures of one of their cattle that was covered with snow and ice. And Jackie does have a picture of that to show you, to give you an idea of what some of the livestock faced. They were stranded out in the fields, and because the wind just pushed them and pushed them, and they couldn't move any further. Some of the cattle ended up being suffocated. One of our neighbors lost 125 head of cattle, and so that was a very, very sad time in our area with all of the loss of livestock. And I'd like to just put in some of my thoughts at that time. After the storm had ended, Dad got on the M tractor that we had that had the loader on it. And fortunately, he was able to back it out of the garage where he kept it. And as I stood on the drawbar on the back side behind him on the tractor, we drove out into the field where our cattle had been pushed by the wind into about a half mile to the south and in the southeast corner of our property. They stood there because they couldn't go any farther due to a barbed wire fence that was the southern perimeter of our property. Had the fence not been there, it's hard telling how far the wind would have pushed them to the south. But what is most memorable to me was when Dad and I would be on that tractor, and we would see humps of snow on this windswept prairie out in our field. So Dad would drive over there with a tractor. We would check to see if the animal was alive or not. And most of these smaller humps were sheep, were our ewes. Our flock of ewes wintered along with our herd of cows to the west of our house. And it was never an issue to have them winter there and where we fed them. But this particular time in 1966 was just awful. It was a time of such sadness. So when we'd get up to some of these snow piles, we would see that the sheep were laying there, burdened down into the snow. Some of them were alive, and some of them were not. But for me, the most haunting memory was going up to one of these ewes who was burdened with all this snow on her. She could, and you knew that from the storm that it got to a point out in the middle of the field and she could not go any further. So consequently, the look in the eyes of those animals was, as I said, haunting. It was as if they were pleading with you to please help them. They were so spent from the ravaging wind and snow, but mostly the wind. As we were able to get the snow off some of these ewes, these female sheep, most cases we were able to stand them up. And once they got their bearings, I mean, it was an amazing act of God to be able to say that he saved some of these sheep, that we could rescue them and get them home. But then the ewes would start walking in the tire track made by the tractor. So then they could start to work their way over to where the cows were corralled, you might say, in the southeast corner of that field. And I just remember too the feeling, watching them, the feeling of distraught. And I think if they could have wept, they would have. But because it was just it, they had never faced the perils of this extreme weather before on their body. And of course, because it was a 3-day storm, they hadn't had feed for that long of time either, because we couldn't get out to feed them. So by the time the ewes and the cows all got together, we cut the fence in that southeast corner of the field and ended up, that's a section line road. So we guided the livestock on that road. And then when they walked so slowly to the county road, and then we turned them to go north the half mile to our farm. It was a very slow procedure for them to walk home. There was no other way to get them home other than to do that. And I remember when they turned to go up our driveway, it was almost as if they could have run, they would have, because they sought that protection from the farm. They sought water, they sought feed, and they knew that our family would take care of them. What happened after that, when all the livestock got back together again, was, and we were able to start to take care of them. And of course, we had to move high drifts of snow. What happened after that, though, was that a lot of these cattle and sheep, but I particularly remember the cattle, had frozen hooves, and they couldn't walk anymore, and so we had to put them down. And it was one of the saddest days of my life, and Dad too. He cried because he was so hurt with sadness for his cattle, and he was a steward. He loved his cattle and farm ground, and they were very, very much a part of who he was. And to see them suffer like that was tremendously hard. So that's the real vivid picture that I have of that storm of 66. But let's move on from there. And Jackie, do you want to talk about our precious neighbors to the east?
Okay, I want to show that picture that you mentioned of the
Okay.
cow. This is one of the cows that was on the Nugabar farm, and she is just frozen in place there, just
Hmm.
frozen in place. Marlis Nugabar shared this photo of this cow. We don't know if this cow lived or not, but there she was, a frozen statue.
As were many of ours, very similar like that, and cows of in other herds around the state. They the windswept prairie just blew those cattle to keep going to the south, and with all that wind and snow, and then and turned to be ice. They livestock. This is how the result of the looks of those cattle.
Hmm. Now, which one? Where would you like me to go? To the east or return up north
Let
for another
We can go to the
memory?
north.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. So you'll be saying during the '66 blizzard about, and you're
Sure.
talking about Robert, or he's now called Bob. We knew him as
Yes.
Robert.
Yes, yes, yes. The Again, on that Nugabar farm, it was so neat to collect the memories from both Marlis, who lived in town and in Bismarck, and Bob, who at the time, and we called him Robert then,
Mhm.
what was a student at UND. And UND, University of North Dakota, was on the semester system at and so they had a little bit different setup versus what Jackie did, having come home from NDSU. So at Grand Forks, where UND was, Robert said that the storm started there on the evening of Wednesday, March 2nd. About when I was leaving the library, it soon became quite intense. So I figured it was going to possibly be even worse than what they were predicting. Needless to say, classes for the rest of the week were canceled, and I spent a lot of time in my dorm room listening to storm reports on KFYR radio out of Bismarck. And of course, I'm sure he was very concerned about what was happening at his home near us. The visibility, let's see, they reported zero visibility there for many hours at a stretch.
And to continue Robert's memories, our dorm did not have food service. That was in another dorm across the campus. Fellow students and I formed a human chain and navigated our way to the other dorm. We might have been okay without doing it, but we did not want to take any chances to get separated and possibly lost in this storm. Robert continues, my future wife was living on a farm near Kintyre, North Dakota at that time. She said they also formed a human chain in order to get to the barn. You just set off in the right direction and hope you didn't miss it. She fell down a snowbank one time and thought about how that could easily have become tragic. We had both heard about other people getting lost in previous blizzards and ending up dead in a pasture or some other place.
Yes, yes. And then Robert also notes that when the storm subsided on Saturday, and he sends a few facts to us, we heard reports of very high snow accumulations, such as 22.4 inches in Bismarck, 29.5 inches in Grand Forks, where he was, and about 35 inches in Devil's Lake. I think Devil's Lake was probably the hardest hit with the most snow in the state of North Dakota. Amazingly, Robert says there was a sharp line beyond which very little snow fell. Minot only had a trace of snow, as did all areas north and west of approximately the max North Dakota area. The temperatures during the storm was not overly cold. It seems like it was mostly in the lower 20s. And so that's from Robert, our neighbor Bob Nugabar, who lived to the north. So some cases in the state had very little concern about all this blizzarding and terrible weather conditions that was happening to the south and to the east and of them. And yet, I'm sure many people, probably everybody in the state, was glued to their radios and televisions to learn more of what was happening. So, Jackie,
Well,
how about our neighbors to the east? And I
okay.
want to point out to our viewers too that these memories, I mean, you can read about that story of March of the blizzard of 66, but these memories are spoken from people who actually lived during that time and lived during the blizzard. And we are all still alive to share those memories and how they imprinted on our lives. So Jackie, let's move to our neighbor to the east.
Okay, our neighbors to the east were uh, named Salter. And this is from Patty Salter Ennan and her husband Dave. And Patty begins, Dad lost all of his heifers when the roof of a pole barn collapsed due to the weight of the snow. At Dave's folks' farm, the shed that housed the milk cows and some yearlings became covered with snow. The boards of the roof were removed to lower hay to the cattle. The cows were milked, and the milk was taken out through the roof. The south end of the building was open but filled with snow. Eventually, a pathway was shoveled through the snow so the cattle could get out. A lot of cows drifted to the south. Their eyes had frozen over. The ice had to be broken off their eyes so they could be herded home.
Hmm. Yep. And that was the story from farm to farm, from ranch to ranch, the pitiful sadness that occurred in the with the livestock and in the hearts of farmers and ranchers through and their families throughout North Dakota. We have another neighbor, Judy Goring Miller to the south, who shared her thought. And by the way, Judy used to be our babysitter, so she has some memories too that she can recall from that time. And she was
Mhm.
living at home with her dad. Her mom was not alive at that time, and Judy was working at the Big Boy in Bismarck when the blizzard started. And I'm going to, there we go. Uh, she said the Big Boy was closed for 2 days. Actually, I got off work at 7 p.m., stayed overnight, and the next day at my sister Joanne's house in Bismarck. The Big Boy was closed for 2 days. Mr. McDowell, my boss, had a Jeep with a snowblade on the front, which he used to open up the drive through lane. Mr. McDowell also had a trailer with a snowmobile on it. I had a trailer hitch on the back of my car, a Buick Wildcat. So he hitched the trailer to my car so that I could drive home to Menoken and check on my dad, Howard. Now you have to realize that the Goring farm was just on the south side of the Northern Pacific Railroad tracks. They had there were two potential ways to get to their farm once they could cross the tracks. And Judy had explained to me that in the wintertime, they only use the west entrance to cross the tracks to then get to their farm, which was about a half mile to the east. So she says, I was able to unload the snowmobile and drive across the train tracks and travel that half mile to our farm. Prior to that time, my dad had been working at the Menoken elevator, and a stray rat terrier puppy had come to the elevator. Dad took him home, or I should say, she home, in the pocket of his parka and named her Tina. They became great companions. Well, Tina plays a pretty important part as we move forward with Judy's story. I suggested to Dad that he sleep in my bed because it had an electric blanket. He took that advice. Tina crawled in under the covers with him. He only had that small coal fired furnace in the living room that he had kept burning during the blizzard. And you might know that the Goring family did not have running water in their home at that time. So they did not have to be concerned at that time about any pipes freezing. But the house was bitterly cold. She says he and Tina were very cozy in bed, but this is a kind of a funny happenstance. When I arrived home, I found that Dad had forgotten to turn on the electric blanket, but Tina kept him warm enough. So the blizzard produced a bitter cold temperature. Dad did not lose any livestock. The electricity stayed on, and the phone kept working. The community, and this is where we talk about these small farming communities back in the era of the 50s and 60s and how they pulled together. And especially we note that about our Menoken community in our book, While the Windmill Watched, A Slice of Rural America in the 1950s. But Judy notes again, just as Marge did in her comments, how the community pulled together to help everyone dig out. Northern Improvement Company of Bismarck sent out big equipment to Menoken. So that would have been Bismarck was about 10 miles west of Menoken. And that helped folks dig out because, of course, in that era, we just had small shovels on the fronts of farmhands. It was a massive undertaking to be able to move those so tall snowdrifts that you couldn't even get through. And of course, they were so wind packed that the snow was just tighter than tight. It would certainly be quite the great snow to build igloos out of, but boy, we sure didn't need it at that point and all that snow in that location. But Judy goes on to say that again about the big equipment being provided by Northern Improvement Company to help folks dig out. And our neighbor, Kenny T, worked for that company, and he probably operated the equipment. We are unsure about that, who did, but again, because of the camaraderie of people in the community and even the wonderful people in Bismarck who had businesses that could help dig out farmers and ranchers outside of the Bismarck community. It was such a wonderful a time of gathering, you might say, but in hopes of helping each other out of a terrible, terrible situation. So, Jackie,
Yes.
do you want to end up talking about sharing the story that Bev has?
I will do that. All righty.
Okay.
Our friend Beverly Thorsten Vollmer of Wing recalls this. Now, Wing is northeast of where we lived, 20 plus miles or so. She says, the blizzard of 66 was unforgettable. I remember how mad I was at Dad because he wouldn't let me go to the district basketball tournament in Tuttle because of the storm probabilities. He was certainly right, and I was glad I was home and sound, huddled around a kerosene lamp and a bottle glass stove, and having the ability to have running water it was drawn from a hot water tank. A small battery radio kept us informed. The radio repeatedly read the list of names after the heading. If anyone knows the whereabouts of, and on it went.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amazingly, considering the storm was as treacherous as it was, that there were not more lives lost during that time. But lives were lost. Cattle were lost. Sheep were lost. It was a time of great sadness within the state. And yet the silver lining of it, don't you think, Jackie, was that people pulled together to help each other to dig out from the terrible situation that we had encountered due to the weather, you might say. And I guess that's something to expect when you live on the plains. And we had wind all the time, especially the northern Great Plains. And so, of course, when snow came, more than likely it was going to be an issue. But this was such a huge storm cell coming out from Colorado, I believe it was, and then South Dakota, and up our way and into Minnesota and Canada. So it certainly made an impact on our lives. It is interesting too that, and probably many of the people who are watching this fun chat have recalled seeing a photo. It's a very famous photo of the 1966 blizzard where this gentleman, and we do have a picture in our book too, this gentleman is standing on top of a huge snowdrift, and he's touching the top of an electric pole, a wooden electric pole. Do you have it there?
Yeah.
Yes, that one. But underneath him, if I recall correctly, is a Northern Pacific train that had to be dug out. And that's even in other parts of the state, that was the situation too. It took the mega efforts of everybody in order to get us going again, get our economy going, especially our rural economy going, and overcome the sadness that came about because of those days of March 2nd through the 5th of 1966. Jackie, do you have any final thoughts?
I don't have any final thoughts except join us next week when we hope to have a more fun chat for you.
Yes.
We will have a guest at that time. So until that time, let your mind wander to those poodle skirts and the soda jerks and those cool cars of the 1950s. And be sure to click on the red subscribe button and the thumbs up button on that icon and tell your friends, even your relatives, about the 1950s Fun Chat.
Yes. We'd love to have you subscribe and be a regular follower of our Fun Chat channel. It is fun, especially if you're a baby boomer, to listen to these folks tell about memories that they've had from the 1950s. And we have such a wonderful variety of guests who lived anywhere, everywhere in the world, and we bring them on and just have a delightful time visiting with them. So Jackie, it's been a less than fun chat today, but we know that we will come back the next week and move forward with that. So again, viewers, if you have any comments about your time, your life, your memories, memories of your parents, your grandparents during the blizzard in North Dakota of March of 1966, please let us know about them. We'd love to hear what you have to say. So see you next time on the
But
1950s.
in the meantime, join us live every week, Monday, 8 p.m. Central. And if you can't join us at that time, well, view our YouTube program. You can just find it at the 1950s Fun Chat. So, toodaloo till next time.